All right, so for this week, we're looking at Korean immigrants and racialization, and we're going to see similar patterns and similar production of an Asian race, this case being a Korean race that we saw with the Chinese immigrants and Japanese immigrants before them. And I will give you two examples, the Alien Land Act of Land Laws of 1913 and the Char case, a Korean immigrant who fought for the U.S. during World War I and tried to get a citizenship. Now, the first group of Koreans did come with the Japanese laborers because Japan would colonize Korea, and so Koreans were considered Japanese nationals. However, Koreans themselves considered themselves political refugees, and much of their time in the United States up until the end of World War II was spent with trying to fight for Korean independence from Japanese colonial rule. And the Korean laborers came because Japanese laborers and the Chinese laborers before them were demanding better working conditions and better pay, along with the Chinese. And so the plantation owners wanted to look for new Asian labor. And so they looked to Korea as a source of new Asian labor. Now, what was going on at Korea was also interesting because Christian missionaries were evangelizing in Korea, and many were converting as well to Christianity. And the missionaries said, you should go because you would be treated better in America because America is a Christian country. And then the same recruiters were telling the plantation owners, you should get the Koreans because they're Christian and they're cheap. They're cheaper than the Chinese and the Japanese Asian labor. So uh, uh, even though they were Christian, when they came to the U.S. to work on the plantations, they were racialized as being Asian. So Christianity didn't do very much for them. And later on, though, you will see that the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Chinese plantation laborers did work together to strike. And because of that, the plantation owners had to look for another source of cheap labor, being South Asian cheap labor or Filipino cheap labor. Now, Ersuk Etsem Char was a Korean immigrant who came to the U.S. and then he served in the U.S. military during World War I, and he attempted to become a naturalized citizen, thinking that his service for the country would entitle him to naturalization. The courts, though, disagreed because the court said he was of the Mongol race, and that the draft law, the court explained, clearly did not contemplate the incorporation of those not eligible for citizenship in the armed forces. So just to backtrack, there was a law in place during World War I that said if you served in the U.S. military, you can become a naturalized citizen if you are not yet a naturalized citizen. But that did not include, according to the court, people who are Asian, because Asians are not eligible to become citizen. So even though he served, that law does not apply to him. All right. So that is an example of a form of political racialization, because it is a law and it is a court ruling through the legal system that reaffirms and legitimates what a Korean race is. A Korean race is part of a Mongol race, which is not white. And so as you read, and I guess I didn't talk about the Alien Land Act. Now, the Alien Land Act was passed in California, and then shortly after, many other states passed it. Arizona, New Mexico, Washington. And what this did was it said that aliens who are not eligible to become United States citizen cannot own or lease, meaning rent, land. And the reason why they were doing this is because the Japanese, as well as the Koreans, were entering into agriculture as small farm laborers. They were renting farms, they were buying up land, and they were competing with, of course, white farmers. And so that competition led to an economic form of racialization that then overlaps with political, because they got the lawmakers to pass the Alien Land Act, which prohibited Asians, because they were not eligible to become citizen, from owning or leasing land. All right. So these are the examples of racialization and how it created this idea of a Korean race, and legitimated the discrimination that they experience within our legal system and within our society because they are part of the Korean race.